The towering marble pillars of the Supreme Court chamber stood silent, holding their breath beneath the weight of history. Every seat was filled, every camera ready. The nation was watching. Justice Samuel Alito sat at the long bench, his face composed but eyes sharp, a man known for his strict devotion to the Constitution's original text. Across from him stood Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett, calm yet unyielding, her bright red blazer cutting through the chamber's solemn tones like a warning flare. She placed her notes neatly on the podium, her hands steady. "Justice Alito," she began, her voice measured but firm, "before I present my arguments, I want to revisit something you once said." The room hushed. Crockett lifted a crisp sheet of paper under the harsh white lights. "You once wrote," she continued, "the Constitution makes no mention of abortion, and no such right is implicitly protected by any constitutional provision." She paused, letting his own words echo through the chamber, words from his Dobbs opinion that had changed the course of American law. Then, she looked directly at him. "But today," she said clearly, "I plan to show that you do not apply that same logic to other rights you personally favor." A wave of whispers swept across the gallery. Cameras clicked. Alito's brow tightened. The Chief Justice leaned forward, about to intervene, but Crockett wasn't done. "What happens," she asked, "when a justice is forced to face his own contradictions? We're about to see." The moment hung in the air, electric, heavy, historic. This wasn't just another congressional hearing. It was a collision of power and principle, and for the first time in years, the highest court in America was about to be challenged, not with outrage, but with reason. Jasmine Crockett had come prepared, and the Supreme Court had no idea what was coming next. The air inside the chamber grew heavy, every whisper swallowed by the weight of what was unfolding. Justice Samuel Alito, the man whose opinions had reshaped decades of precedent, leaned slightly forward, his expression cautious, his authority radiating across the marble room. Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett flipped open a thick binder. Her preparation was meticulous, each tab, each highlight, each footnote was a weapon crafted from Alito's own words. "Justice Alito," she began evenly, "you've built your reputation on originalism, the belief that the Constitution must be interpreted based on its original text and the understanding of the founders." Alito nodded, his tone measured. "Yes, that is correct. The court cannot invent rights beyond what the Constitution provides." Crockett looked up from her papers. "Then let's compare that to your ruling in New York State Rifle and Pistol Association versus Bruin," she said. "You expanded public gun-carrying rights, something not clearly stated in the Second Amendment's text." A low murmur swept the room. Crockett's gaze didn't waver. "Can you explain," she asked, "why carrying weapons in public meets your historical test, but a woman's right to control her own body, practiced since America's earliest years, does not?" Justice Alito's jaw tightened. "Those matters involve different constitutional foundations," he said, his voice clipped. "The Second Amendment clearly protects the right to keep and bear arms. Abortion holds no such explicit protection." Crockett nodded once, calm, composed. "Yet the Ninth Amendment clearly states that listed rights cannot be used to deny other rights retained by the people. Doesn't that suggest the founders expected unlisted rights to be protected?" Silence. Even the Chief Justice looked uneasy. "And since you brought up history," she continued, "early American common law allowed abortion until quickening, around 16 weeks. Medical texts owned by the founders themselves mention it." The whispers grew louder. A camera shutter echoed. Before anyone could cut her off, Crockett turned another page. "In Carson versus Markin, you supported forcing taxpayers to fund religious schooling, something not in the Constitution at all. The founders like Madison opposed public money for religion." Her tone sharpened slightly. "So, it seems your historical test didn't apply there either. Would you call that another example of inconsistency?" Alito exhaled, visibly irritated. That case involved the Free Exercise Clause, which has its own historical record. Unmoved, Crockett continued. "And in Citizens United, you supported corporate First Amendment rights, though corporations aren't mentioned in the Constitution, and the founders never intended businesses to hold personal liberties." She gestured toward a digital display. Here, she said, I've charted 20 of your major decisions. Blue markers show where you restricted rights based on text and history. Red markers show where you expanded rights without strong historical backing. The screen flickered to life. Blue clustered around voting rights, reproductive freedoms, and criminal justice. Red spread across religion, guns, and corporate power. This is extremely misleading. Alito snapped. I've interpreted nothing, Crockett replied softly. These are your own rulings. She looked directly into his eyes. Do you apply one constitutional method when you agree with a right, and another when you do not? Gasps. Flashbulbs. A moment suspended in disbelief. Alito's face hardened. That question is insulting and false, he said sharply. I follow the same principles in every case. Crockett didn't flinch. Then let's see if your record agrees. She clicked to the next slide. 2 quotes appeared side by side, both written by Alito himself. The confrontation had only begun, and the courtroom was about to see what calm logic could do when it cornered power. 2 quotes glowed on the massive courtroom screen, both written by Justice Samuel Alito. On the left, his words from Dobbs versus Jackson. The Constitution does not mention abortion, and therefore does not protect it. On the right, his earlier statement from Obergefell versus Hodges, opposing same-sex marriage. The Constitution protects certain personal choices central to individual dignity and autonomy. The contradiction was unmistakable. The room tensed as reporters typed furiously, fingers racing across keyboards. Crockett spoke softly, but each word hit like a hammer. Justice Alito, those are your own words. How can autonomy matter in one case, but vanish in another? Alito's voice rose slightly. You're taking this out of context. Context, Crockett replied, is exactly what I'm providing. She pressed a button. A video clip began playing across the monitors. Alito's voice from 2006 echoed through the chamber. No one is above the law. Then, Crockett cut in. Yet in Trump versus Vance, you dissented, arguing that the president need not comply with a subpoena. That's shielding power, not limiting it. The tension was palpable. Cameras zoomed in. Alito's expression darkened. That case involved separation of powers, he said sharply. Crockett didn't miss a beat. Speaking of power, let's talk about ethics. She lifted another document. Your wife attended January 6 rallies and donated to candidates pushing false election claims, cases you may eventually rule on. How is that not a conflict of interest? Gasps. Reporters froze. A few justices exchanged uneasy looks. Alito's tone cracked. My wife's actions are her own. This is inappropriate. The chairman slammed the gavel. Order. Congresswoman, please. With respect, Mr. Chairman, Crockett interjected calmly, oversight includes ethics. Her gaze turned back to Alito. You were photographed flying a Let's Go Brandon flag, a direct political insult aimed at the president. Does that align with judicial impartiality? For a moment, even the marble walls seemed to hold their breath. Alito's face flushed red. It was a neighborhood dispute, he muttered. The code of conduct does not formally apply to this court. So, Crockett said, voice still even, the highest court in America operates with fewer ethics rules than all lower courts. The silence was thunderous. The court has internal protocols, Alito shot back. Like Justice Thomas deciding his own recusal when his wife was involved in election activism. Crockett asked. Or Justice Gorsuch not disclosing property sales to attorneys arguing before him. Every word cut deeper. Lawmakers shifted in their seats. Reporters exchanged stunned glances. Then, it happened. Alito's composure cracked. His hand slammed against the desk, sending a glass of water spilling across his notes. This is political harassment, he shouted. You twist my record for drama. The Supreme Court deserves respect. The room exploded, cameras flashed, voices clashed, the chairman's gavel struck repeatedly. Order! Order! But the damage was done. The justice had lost control, and the entire nation had seen it happen. Through it all, Jasmine Crockett didn't raise her voice once. She stood calm, hands folded, eyes steady, watching the most powerful man in the room unravel under the weight of his own contradictions. When the chairman finally called for a 15-minute recess, the tension was still electric. Reporters rushed out, phones in hand, headlines already forming. And in that moment, one thing became clear. Crockett's calm had broken the court's composure. She had done what few ever dared, and she had done it with nothing but facts. When the recess ended, the air in the Supreme Court chamber felt different. Gone was the rigid composure that had defined the morning. Reporters whispered behind their screens, staffers avoided eye contact, and the justices, once towering figures of calm, now looked uneasy. As the clock struck noon, Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett returned to the podium. No grand gestures. No raised voice. Just the steady rhythm of a woman who knew the truth didn't need theatrics, only clarity. She began slowly, her tone precise. Before the break, Justice Alito accused this committee of political harassment. I'd like to remind everyone that oversight of the judiciary is part of the Constitution, Article 1, Section 8. That landed like a quiet thunderclap. Even the chairman hesitated before nodding. Crockett flipped a page, her red pen sliding neatly under a line of text. Now, let's pick up where we left off, judicial accountability. The screen behind her lit up again, showing a timeline of Supreme Court ethics controversies. Undisclosed gifts, secret trips, partisan donations. At the center of it all, the image of the American flag with an upside-down print, the same symbol that had flown outside Justice Alito's home. Crockett turned toward him. Justice Alito, the judiciary relies on public trust. When symbols associated with insurrection appear outside a justice's home, do you believe that builds or destroys that trust? He shifted in his seat. I will not comment on private matters. Crockett nodded. Then let's talk about public matters. She gestured to the display. You've accepted undisclosed travel benefits from political donors, several of whom filed briefs in cases you later ruled on. Did you ever consider recusing yourself? Murmurs swept the gallery. Alito's voice lowered to a defensive tone. Those events had no influence on my rulings. Perhaps not, Crockett replied, but the appearance of bias can be just as damaging as bias itself. Would you agree? No answer. She leaned forward slightly. Justice Brandeis once said, sunlight is the best disinfectant. Would you object to a law requiring the Supreme Court to disclose gifts and travel, like every lower court judge must? Alito hesitated. The court's independence must be protected from political influence. Independence, Crockett repeated, her voice steady, does not mean immunity. That line hit hard. Even Justice Kagan, sitting quietly at the far end, looked up from her notes. Crockett continued, if independence becomes a shield for secrecy, then the people lose trust. And when trust erodes, the very foundation of our democracy weakens. The room went silent again, not tense, but thoughtful. Even Alito seemed unsure how to respond. His earlier anger had burned out, replaced by something else, realization, maybe even discomfort. Crockett took a slow breath. The founders gave each branch a check. Not to weaken the court, but to keep it honest. That's what we're doing here today. She closed her folder gently, the sound echoing like a gavel strike of her own. Justice Alito, she said quietly, this isn't about left or right. It's about whether the highest court in the land still answers to the Constitution, or just to itself. For a long moment, Alito said nothing. His eyes dropped to his papers, his voice barely above a whisper. I understand your concern, Congresswoman. Crockett nodded once, respectful, not triumphant. Then she turned to the committee chair. Mr. Chairman, I have no further questions. The room erupted in applause, quiet at first, then building like a wave. Even those who disagreed with her couldn't deny what they had just witnessed. A masterclass in restraint, intellect, and moral authority. As cameras flashed and headlines formed, one truth was clear. Jasmine Crockett hadn't just questioned a justice. She had redefined what justice looked like. By nightfall, the footage had already gone viral. Clips of Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett standing firm before the Supreme Court bench flooded every major network. CNN, MSNBC, even Fox, all replaying the same moment when her calm logic disarmed the fury of Justice Alito. The headline on every ticker was the same. Crockett confronts the court. In a single day, the hearing had become more than oversight, it was a mirror held up to power. Television CNN anchor. Legal analysts are calling it one of the most consequential congressional interrogations in modern history. Television MSNBC host. Crockett didn't shout. She didn't grandstand. She simply out-reasoned a Supreme Court justice. Television Fox News commentator. Whether you agree or not, this was a rare moment where a member of Congress put the judiciary on notice, calmly but unmistakably. Across social media, millions shared one particular line, the moment Crockett said, "Independence does not mean immunity." It became a rallying cry, printed on protest signs, quoted by professors, tweeted by law students, and echoed in lecture halls across the country. In Harvard Law Review, an emergency editorial appeared the next morning. Crockett's questioning may represent a turning point in judicial accountability, a reminder that even those who interpret the law must sometimes be reminded of its spirit. At Yale, a packed auditorium of law students watched the clip in stunned silence. One student whispered, "That's how history changes, not with shouting, but with evidence." Even within the Supreme Court itself, ripples began to spread. Chief Justice Roberts privately called for an internal meeting to discuss the creation of a formal ethics code, something the court had resisted for years. Justice Kagan reportedly remarked to a clerk, "She did what many of us couldn't say out loud." Meanwhile, Justice Alito stayed silent. No public statement. No press appearance. Only a single line released by his office. "I stand by my record." But behind the scenes, insiders whispered of a justice shaken, not by anger, but by reflection. That evening, as the sun set over Washington, Jasmine Crockett stood on the Capitol steps, surrounded by cameras. A reporter shouted, "Congresswoman, do you think today's hearing changed anything?" She smiled faintly, her tone steady, the same calm that had carried her through the storm. Change never happens in a day. But accountability begins the moment someone asks a question no one else dares to. The crowd fell silent. The flash of cameras lit her face against the dusk. In that moment, it was clear, this wasn't just another political clash. It was a reckoning, a moment when power met principle, and principle refused to back down. History would remember that day not for the shouting or the scandal, but for the woman who stood, unshaken, before the highest court in the land, and reminded America what justice was supposed to mean.